guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing this traditional beautiful granny square. I am doing this one as a bonus square to my Bake Shop blanket series. It will match all of the sizes of those squares, so it's a little larger than most granny squares, but you can definitely follow this tutorial to learn how to make a granny square even if you're not following the Bake Shop blanket series. It will work for any type of project. It's just a plain granny square. So let's go ahead and get started. I also want to mention that you will need to know the basic crochet stitches. So you'll need to know a slip knot, a double crochet, a slip stitch, all of those. So if you're unfamiliar or still learning, please refer back to my crochet beginner series and you'll learn everything you need to know to make this project. So starting here, I am using a worsted weight yarn and a size H hook, and we're just going to start with a slip knot. I chose to use Vanna's Choice for this just because that's what I had on hand. There's my H 5mm hook, and you're just going to chain 6. So we're going to start with a foundation chain of 6. I'm starting with the white just because I want white to be my center color for all of my traditional granny squares, but you can do any color combination that you prefer. We'll go over how to change colors as well. So we've slip stitched into the first of those 6 chains, and now we've chained up 2, so we form a ring here. We're going to be stitching in the middle of the ring, so don't stitch into the stitches themselves, stitch into the center of the ring, and we're going to do a double crochet after we've done that chain up 2, and do a second double crochet into the center of the ring again. Make sure you're not going into those chain stitches. So now we've chained 2 and done 2 double crochets. We're going to chain 3. So there are our 3 chains, and then we're going to work 3 more double crochets into the center of that ring again. All of our stitches on this first round are going to be worked in the center of the ring. This is very important that you don't work into those chain stitches from the beginning. You want to be absolutely sure you're going in the center of the ring. So here we are working that last 3rd double crochet, and that is our first corner. So you can see that that kind of makes a corner. So after our 3 double crochets, we're going to chain 3 and then work 3 more double crochets. This is forming our second corner. Each of these chain 3 spaces is a corner of our granny square. So if you're brand new to crocheting and you're working your first granny square with me right now, you can see as we work this that each chain 3 forms a corner, making a square shape. So after we've done 3 double crochets, we're going to chain 3 once again for our 3rd corner. You can see a bit of a pattern here. 3 double crochets, and then we just need to make that last 4th corner. After we finish, this is our 3rd double crochet. So we're going to chain 3 one more time. We can see that we're almost through with our square here. So go ahead and chain 3. This is our 4th chain 3 in our 4th corner. And we're just going to slip stitch into the top of that first chain 2. So go ahead and pull through, slip stitch. And so now we are done with the first round of this granny square. Congratulations if this is your first granny square ever. I'm going to go ahead and change color here. You can keep working in the same color if you like, but you need to finish off your yarn if you're going to change color here along with me. So just snip your yarn, leaving a few inches to weave in that tail. And we can see that's our first round done. So now I'm going to grab my second color. I'm going to be using minty green. I'm following the colors of the Bake Shop blanket series color scheme, but you can do any colors you like. So I have my second yarn here in the same worsted weight, and what we're going to do is we're going to basically pull up this yarn through one of our corners. So you want to insert your hook into one of those corner chain 3 spaces. Not into the stitch itself, but into the corner, and just pull up your yarn. Now we're going to secure it in just a moment, so you want to make sure to hold on to that tail so it doesn't go anywhere on you. It's a little loose, but we're going to tie it down in just a moment. So we've chained up 2 with our new color. We're going to do 2 double crochets into this chain space. Again, not working into the stitches, the chain stitches themselves, but into the chain space. And now we're going to chain up 3 after we've worked our chain 2 and our first 2 double crochets. Chain 3, and in that same chain 3 space that we're still working in, we're going to do 3 more double crochets. This is creating our first corner for round 2. So there's our second and our third double crochet. Now at this point I'm going to take my hook out. You can see that this tail is a little loose. I'm going to do something that some very traditional crocheters and some of you out there who may be a little more experienced may not agree with, but this is what works for me and this is what I find to be most secure. I go ahead and tie a knot with that tail from round 1, that white tail, and my new tail from tying on my new yarn. I just tie a knot and then I'll weave in those ends later, and you will never see the knot, you'll never know it's there, but I find that with my color changes and doing so many color changes, it holds long-term better. So after we've done that 3 double crochets, we're going to chain 1, and then we're going to begin working in that other second corner. We're going to work 3 double crochets into our next chain 3 space. So you should be skipping over 3 double crochets from round 1. We did that chain 1 to give us a little space skipping over those stitches. So we've done 3 double crochets. We're going to chain up 3, and then we're going to work 3 more double crochets. And we're going to follow this same sequence all the way around for all of the corners here in round 2. So you can see how that second corner is looking. There's our chain 1 space creating a little gap. We're going to be working into that on round 3. And you can see we worked all of these stitches, our 3 double crochets, chain 3, and 3 double crochets all into that one space. Now moving on to the third chain 3 space, we're going to chain 1 to skip over those double crochets from below, and we're going to do the same thing we just did. We're going to do 3 double crochets, a chain 3, and then 3 double crochets. As you're starting to get the hang of this and see how it's taking shape, as we move along and as our granny square gets bigger, we're going to do the same, what I'm going to call a corner cluster. This is our corner cluster right now that you're working. 3 double crochets, chain 3, and 3 more double crochets. I'm going to go over all of this slowly with you with each round and really take our time explaining everything and making sure that everything is really clear for you. But that corner cluster is always going to be the same. Whenever you are working the corner of your granny square, no matter how big your granny square gets, you will always do the same 3 double crochets, chain 3, and 3 double crochets in that corner. So your corner cluster will never change. It will always be the same. So here we are working our last corner cluster. Don't forget to chain 1 in between your corner clusters so that you have that little gap floating above your chain or your double crochets. Here we are finishing up working that corner, our 4th corner. Here is our 3rd and final double crochet for our corner cluster. And now we've come back around to the beginning, so we just need to chain 1, again creating that small chain space. We're going to be working in that for round 3, so we need to make sure that's there, and then we just need to slip stitch into our first chain 2 to close off. I'm going to change color with every round, so I'm going to go ahead and finish off my yarn here with this mint color and change to my next color. You don't have to change color, but I just want to show you guys lots of color changes, and I think that it makes for a really detailed, beautiful granny square. Make sure to tighten all your ends there. And I'm going to change color exactly the same way. So now I'm going to be working with a chocolate brown worsted weight yarn. You want to make sure all your yarns are consistent, so even if they're not the same brand, make sure that they're the same weight and a similar feel to them. So I'm just going to bring up that yarn, working into one of my corners. You can start in any corner. and we're going to chain up 2, and we're going to work a corner cluster just like we just did. So go ahead and double crochet and a second double crochet. We're going to continue just like we have been with 3 chain stitches. 1, 2, and 3, and then 3 more double crochets. And again, I'm going to stop here after those 3 double crochets and go ahead and knot my yarn just to make sure it's super secure. Everybody has a different way of doing this. There are lots of different ways to change color. So if you have a different way of doing it, by all means, go right ahead. I just wanted to show you my method that I've found to be the sturdiest. I also have lots of little kids around my house who love to tug and pull, especially at granny squares with all of the nice little, spaces in them. So I just like to make sure it's super extra secure. So I've knotted that off. I'm going to put my hook back in where I was. We just finished our 3 double crochets from that corner cluster. Now we're going to be working in that chain 1 space from round 2. So we can see that chain space. We're just going to chain 1 to skip over those stitches, and we're going to work, before we go into our corner, we're going to work in this chain 1 space, and we're just going to do 3 double crochets, nice and simple. That's all you're doing. No chaining in the middle here like we do with our corner clusters. I'm going to call this a side cluster because you're always going to work 3 double crochets in your chain spaces that are along the sides of your work, not on the corners, but on the sides. So now we've chained 1 again, and we're going to work a corner cluster. So again, that's 3 double crochets, chain 3, and 3 double crochets. So you can see our corner clusters are always the same. Every time you're working in a corner, every time you're stitching into a chain 3 space, you're going to do the same thing. 3 double crochets, chain 3, 3 double crochets, nice and simple. So we can see that that's how the first side is looking with both corners done. Now we're going to chain 1 and work 3 double crochets in our chain 1 space here on the side. So we're working a side cluster. Make sure that you are again stitching a chain 1 in between each cluster. So whether you're working a side cluster or a corner cluster, you're going to chain 1 in between always. Because if you don't chain 1, what will happen, and if you forget one and this happens to you, I can pretty surely say that the mistake that you've made is you've forgotten to chain 1. What will happen is your crochet will get very tight, because you're not allowing for those chain spaces for everything to lay flat, and your crochet is not getting those gaps that we want for the granny square. If you forget those chain 1s in between each cluster, everything will look very tight. It'll start to kind of roll in, and it won't lay a nice flat square. It will kind of round out and just be very tight and wonky and not lay flat. So if that's happening to you, go back and make sure that you're chaining 1 in between each cluster. So here we are working our last corner, and we're just doing corner cluster, side cluster, corner cluster, side cluster, all the way around. Here we are working our last 3 double crochets for our last corner cluster. Now coming back around to the side that we started on, we still have 1 more side cluster to work, so I've chained 1 here. And we're going to work 1 more side cluster, so just the 3 double crochets in that chain 1 space, and 3. Be sure that you are chaining 1 after you do that last side cluster before you slip stitch, just to make sure that you have that little gap that we need. So go ahead and slip stitch into your chain 2 at the beginning of this round, round 3. Slip stitch that closed. I'm going to change color once again. So I'm going to snip my yarn. You can see that this is really starting to look like a granny square. If you are just making a granny square blanket and you're not doing the Bake Shop blanket series, you could probably stop here and have a nice small little, I would say this is probably about 4" by 4" granny square here at this point. But I'm going to continue on with my next color to make a larger granny square to go with all of our Bake Shop blanket squares. So here I am tying on our next color. I'm just showing you a different way of attaching your yarn for this granny square. Just another technique that sometimes I use, giving you another option. All I'm doing is tying it on by a knot, so you're not knotting to the tail from the last round. You're just tying on to that chain 3 space with a knot, and then you're just pulling up that yarn. So just a different option, a slight variation on what I've done up until this point, just for giggles. So here we are, we've chained up 2 after we've knotted on that new yarn, and we've worked 2 double crochets. We're going to chain 3 and work 3 double crochets. So again, working this corner cluster. Same as always, you should definitely be very comfortable with the corner cluster at this point. And really, we've learned everything we need to learn to keep going with this in round 4. We're going to chain 1 and we're going to do a side cluster. You can see here that I have 2 chain 1 spaces on this side. Now don't let that scare you. What we're going to be doing is just working 2 side clusters instead of just the 1 side cluster. So with each round that you make this granny square bigger, you're going to gain more side clusters, and you will always have 4 corner clusters. So here we are working the second side cluster. So we've just done 2 side clusters of 3 double crochets each with, remember, those chain 1s in between. And now we're coming to that second corner, and we're working a corner cluster, 3 double crochets, a chain 3 and 3 double crochets. So after this corner cluster is done, we're just going to keep continuing around with 2 side clusters and a corner cluster. I also want to mention here, since hopefully you're getting the hang of where to put your side clusters and where to put your corner clusters, just look at the work in your hands. Look at, am I working in the side or am I working in the corner? And that will tell you which type of cluster you need to be working. It will always be one or the other. So with a traditional granny square, you really don't have to follow a pattern. You don't have to know how to read a written pattern. They're great for beginners to just practice chain stitches and double crochets and make something really beautiful and detailed that's timeless. You know, granny squares have been around for a long, long time. They're kind of the classic crochet look, and something that, you know, I think will always be quite an accomplishment when you can finish a whole granny square blanket. They work up pretty quickly, especially if you don't do as many color changes as I'm doing. I'm doing a different color for each round, which in the end will turn out to be, you know, more detailed and look much more complicated than it really is. I mean, it's really not that hard to color change. I was very intimidated by it at first, but once you realize that really all you have to do is snip the old yarn and tie a new one on and keep going, it creates such a detailed look. It creates a kaleidoscope effect when you have a whole blanket of, you know, all of these small granny squares that have so many different colors within them. And it is a little more time consuming, but it creates such a great effect that I think it's really worth it. And once I got the hang of color changes, I like to use as many colors as I can, but solid color granny squares look great too. So even if you did, you know, a blanket full of solid color granny squares, even if they're, you know, the whole blanket is all solid pink granny squares, with all of those stitches and the little gaps, you know, you're going to look like a pro. You're going to feel like you've, you know, really accomplished something when it is actually very, very simple. So here we are doing our last side cluster. And don't forget, before you slip stitch into your starting chain from this round, round 4, we definitely want to do a chain 1 and then slip stitch to create that last chain 1 gap. We can see this granny square is really starting to take shape and look really, really great. I'm going to do one more round. So this is a 5 round granny square for me. You can stop at any point. This is a great size as well. This is probably about 6 inches by 6 inches. I'm going to finish off with white. So I have a white center, and my outer round is also white, just because that's kind of what matches what I have going with the Bake Shop blanket squares so far. But again, color choice is totally up to you. So here we are. I tied on the same way that I tied on with the last round, just so you can see that again. We're going to chain up 2 and then do 2 double crochets, a chain 3, 3 double crochets, so we're working a corner cluster here. As always, you may not even need to keep watching this video, to be honest with you. You may totally know what you're doing and be a pro in these 20 minutes that we've spent together so far. And you can just keep going and going. But just in case, I just want to go ahead and show you exactly how I finish. Now we have 3 side cluster spaces here for round 5. So we're going to be working 3 side clusters, 3 clusters of 3 double crochets each. That's a little bit of a tongue twister there. 3 side clusters, 3 double crochets each for this round 5. If you're on Pinterest or have seen any crochet blogs in the last couple of years, there's been a blanket style that's a granny square blanket style that has gone kind of viral. And what people do is they start a granny square just like this, the traditional way, but they keep going with it, and it's basically one gigantic granny square that is, you know, the size of a throw blanket, or even, you know, a comforter size granny square that's just massive. And all that they're doing, I'll give you a little secret here while we're still learning, all they're doing is they're just continuing with these rounds past the normal size of a granny square. So I'm continuing past the 3 or 4 rounds that a granny square would traditionally be, just to make kind of a jumbo granny square. If you wanted to make a whole blanket that was one giant granny square, all that you would do is you would just keep tying on new yarns or sticking with the same one, and you would just keep on going larger and larger and larger. You're still going to have those 4 corner clusters always, and then it's just a matter of having more and more side clusters that you're working. So you're still going to chain 1 in between each cluster. You're still going to have just side clusters and just corner clusters. It's just a matter of keeping going and just adding on to this, adding more rounds instead of the more traditional old-fashioned way of making a granny square blanket, where you make, you know, 40 or 50 or even more of these, you know, small 5-inch by 5-inch granny squares, and then sewing them all together. That is the traditional method. That's the method that, you know, all of our grandmothers and great-grandmothers have always done. But this kind of newer, popular way of having a take on the traditional method is to just create one gigantic granny square that's the size of an entire blanket. Keep in mind that that will make a square blanket, obviously. It will not make like a rectangle size throw or anything like that. It will be square. But they turn out really beautiful. You could definitely do multiple rows of a color before you do a color change. You could do it all one color. You could change colors every single row and make it, you know, have sort of a gradient effect, an ombre effect, if you started in the middle with white and then your last row was, you know, black and you went, you know, every shade of gray in between, or your last row was a dark purple and you went every shade of purple in between. All kinds of things. Definitely look around on Pinterest. There are all kinds of really, really beautiful creations with granny squares, and there's all different kinds of granny squares also. I definitely wanted to mention that if you are brand new to crochet and you're watching this video to learn how to make your very first granny square, I do have a series going right now. There's 6 squares released so far, but there will be 12 total plus this bonus square. It's called the Bake Shop Blanket series, and it's a take on the traditional granny square. Instead of it being a traditional granny square center, I have a bake shop kind of dessert motif in the middle. So there's a waffle, there's a cupcake, there's a cookie, all of these different ones worked in the center, and then we create a granny square coming off around it. So it's kind of a newer, different, more modern take on the granny square. So if you're brand new to crochet, definitely practice this right here and get these down and gain some confidence, and then go over and try one of those. I have video tutorials for all of them, so make sure to look on my channel for that playlist and give it a go. You never know how easy something that is more complicated really is. It looks way more complicated than it really is, I promise. So here we are finishing this. I am just doing 5 rounds here for our granny square, and that is all done. You just have to weave in your ends and you are finished. This traditional granny square is really easy. I hope that you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Definitely give me a thumbs up if you liked it, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.